Who showed up at the party at Clint Murchison's house, the man who funded these teams of assassins through E. Howard Hunt and CIA? Who was there? Okay, who was celebrating this? Well, J. Edgar Hoover was there. Okay, Brown brothers were there. Cliff Carter, John Connolly, Senator Joseph Yarborough was there. All these people stood to lose millions from the contracts that they were going that both in Cuba and Vietnam that JFK was pulling them out of. Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Checho, and I am excited and delighted to be delivering part 2 of my special on JFK, proof of how they lied. And today we're going to be covering things that are a little more, I'm a little more comfortable speaking about. I'm a little more knowledgeable about in general, and things that I think are extremely relevant. I mean, besides the facts of the case, which I just attempted to showcase in last week's episode, what a farce the entire Warren Commission is. What a farce that they continue to try to pretend like what happened and write what happened, you know, and things like the context that you're going to see on the bottom of this video. It is astounding to me, and anyone, I'm sure, who looks into the case sincerely, earnestly, without swallowing the Warren Commission's ridiculous fabrication and obfuscation of the truth that they published in the Warren Commission, put out in every grocery store in America. Propaganda, baby. Propaganda. I felt like the most important issues, which were the complete, you know, the farce that was the autopsy, and it came from the ballistics. But I want to read to you guys a summary that I found in one of my new heroes, Mark Lane's book, because nothing encapsulates last week's episode as well as the entire Warren Commission quite like these next few. You know, the next excerpt I'm going to read to you, okay? Because it encapsulates the official narrative and what the Warren Commission came to. And I was going to rehash that again, but this is a much more interesting and articulate way to put it all together for you, okay? So before we carry on, I want to sum up last week's episode with some words from Mark Lane's The Last Word, My Indictment of the CIA in the Murder of JFK, by the incredible Mark Lane. And this is this section is entitled The Magic Bullet, which is actually a phrase he came up with for one of the chapters in his book. But I can't do it justice. I'll just read to you. I originated that phrase in an effort to describe the official explanation in 1964, the magic bullet. In 1966, it served as a title for Chapter 4 of his other book, Rush to Judgment, and it refers to the unprecedented, mystic, and acrobatic propensities of a bullet as imagined by two junior lawyers for the Warren Commission, Arlen Specter and David Bellin, two lawyers each in search of a career at that time. While the bullet took a most fancy flight in their inventive minds, the explanation was not a meaningless flight of fancy. It was absolutely required to save the false conclusions reached by the Warren Commission. The bullet's formal name is CE, Commission Exhibit 399, but not unlike Irvin Johnson, it is better known to millions by its nickname. Here are some relevant facts. The evidence demonstrated that at least 4 shots had been fired and that one had struck a curb, causing a minor injury to a bystander. All the shots had been fired during a period of not more than 5.6 seconds, as demonstrated by a film of the assassination that served as visual evidence and as the clock for the shooting, as the frames ran through the camera at a rate of 18.3 frames per second. The rifle that the commission claimed fired all of the shots was an ancient and inaccurate Mannlicher Carcano, Italian rifle. We'll get back to that. The weapon, with a hand-operated bolt action, was tested by experts who testified that it required at least 2.3 seconds to reload between shots, and that was without time spent in aiming the weapon. The president was seated in the back seat of the passenger side. Directly in front of him on a jump seat was Governor John B. Connally Jr. A bullet entered the president's throat from the front, causing a neat, small entrance wound, according to every doctor who had examined him at Parkland Hospital in Dallas. Another bullet, also fired from the front, was the fatal shot. It threw him backwards and to the left and drove brain and skull matter onto a motorcycle officer to his left and rear. Governor Connally suffered more numerous injuries, likely the result of being struck by more than one bullet. His ribs were shattered, his right wrist severely injured, and his left thigh was penetrated. The commission was distraught, since it began and ended its inquiry with the irrevocable presumption that Oswald was the lone assassin and that he had used the Mannlicher Carcano. If one bullet had missed, as both the evidence and the Warren Commission revealed, then at least 4 shots, probably 5 or more parentheses, had been fired in 5.6 seconds. But with a weapon that required 2.3 seconds between shots, 4 shots could not have been fired, mathematically, okay? 3 intervals, assuming that the weapon was fully loaded before the first shot was fired, and that would have taken, at an absolute minimum, 6.9 seconds. Another problem was that Connally, after studying the film, was able to locate the frame at which he was first struck by a bullet. It took place 1.8 seconds after Kennedy had been hit. The commission concluded that Connally probably never noticed the glancing blow. I'm air quoting, glancing blow. Connally said that he had, quote, noticed the bullet that smashed his ribs and turned splinters into missiles as they exited. Because that's what bullets do. That's me speaking. Back to the quote. Spector and Bellin were asked to invent some explanation. Neither lacking ambition nor imagination, and not bound by rules of logic or adherence to the truth, they created the magic bullet theory. This is the final part I want to read to you. I love this part. Satire permits us to offer this as summary. This is it in a nutshell, okay? This is the accepted narrative. When you are watching this on YouTube and you see that Wikipedia, the Thought Police, has added for context this story, understand this is what they are trying to convince you happened. This is the insult to your intelligence as a human being with sentient and critical thought. Listen. Oswald was at the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository as the president's limousine slowed to a turn on Elm Street. He was so close that he could have thrown the rifle at the president. Apparently, being a sport, he waited until the car gained speed and was a considerable distance from him. The president's back was then the only target available. Oswald fired the first shot, which struck the president in the back. The bullet rose upwards and exited through the president's throat, leaving a small, neat entrance wound. The bullet hung in mid-air for 1.8 seconds until it noticed Connally. It regained speed and entered Connally's back, shattering his ribs. Connally did not notice the glancing blow, which almost killed him. The bullet then made a right downward turn and entered Connally's wrist, his right wrist. Soon, it emerged from that contact and entered Connally's left thigh. The bullet, almost in pristine shape, having quite mysteriously left behind in Connally's wrist more metal than it lost, it was, when weighed and examined by the commission's experts, that's how they knew that, the bullet was discovered at the hospital under the mat of a stretcher that had no contact with Connally, as if it had been placed there. Therefore, one bullet, having accomplished all of the many wounds suffered by Connolly and 2 wounds suffered by Kennedy, it's clear that only 3 shots were fired. Many scholars and others have difficulty in accepting the magic bullet theory. I feel like that is a perfect, absolutely impeccable description and summary of what I attempted to show in the first episode, and also what they want you to believe, the insanity of it. The words ridiculous and absurd come to mind. And those are the words that were used to attack people like Mark Lane when they pointed things like this out. The CIA brought its full array of Operation Mockingbird to bear, and they literally, I was saying this to someone on Instagram who made a comment on my post the other day, and I'm starting to believe this. Investigative reporters, real investigative reporters, were hunted almost to extinction, and it was during this era. And that is the sad truth, because there was some incredible reporters. Mark Lane's a lawyer, there's a difference, who were trying to bring the light of day out, and the closer they got, the deader they got, of every which way. I'm astounded reading Mark Lane's book, the one I just read that quote from, which I cannot recommend enough. All Mark Lane's books are incredible, but The Last Word is one of the most recent, and really has a summary of all the incredible and heinous shit that happened to the people who tried to pursue the truth with him for 30 years after the assassination. So I can't begin to even go into that. That would be a whole other episode. But let me go back to here. So that being said, now I want to start, okay, with the fact, and I want to remind everyone who's listening, who perhaps does not follow me on Instagram or has not heard me rant and rave about the legacy that this country has created, which goes, sadly enough, right back to Nazi Germany and fascism and the aristocrats of England and Europe and their notion that they were destined to rule, because they always have. Some of these families have centuries of legacy where they are, considered of royal bloodlines, and we saw them using Darwin to prop up this notion that there's a superior race, which then became eugenics. Of course, eugenics was across the board. We can find it. In America, it came from England, and of course, obviously, Germany. These were all proponents of eugenics, and eugenics, for those of you who may not know, is the idea that certain genes are superior, therefore certain humans are superior. Now, the way the eugenics is applied, that's another can of worms. But obviously, the Germans thought that they were the master race and they were superior and God's chosen people. And obviously we know that the Zionists, some of the certain populations of the Jewish community, believe that they're God's people and that they're superior and they should be able to call the shots about who gets to live where and do what. And if you notice, this kind of thinking tends to lead to genocide. Just where that idea comes from is beyond me, but I loathe it. I loathe the indoctrination of it into religions and into people. And it is this entitlement, this kind of brash arrogance and disregard for humanity and human life that I'm going to tell you about in the story of JFK and what happened to him, because we got to go all the way back to that. Now, why did the American government come up with such a impossible and lame. And I mean, just even why did it need to do this to account for what happened? And then stick with it dogmatically and really enforce it, by knocking off reporters and killing everyone who could bear witness. Almost everyone. They literally couldn't kill everyone. There was too many people involved, including the Dallas PD. But in many of my videos, I've tried to illustrate to you guys that there is a direct lineage between the burgeoning class of billionaire American financiers, aka the oligarchs, at the turn of the century here in America, and the swindlers who created the Federal Reserve, those criminal banking cartels, who of course funded the oil tycoons, who of course then took their money and made weapons of war. They created the arms industry. They created the petro-pharmaceutical industry. The entire energy sector and control sector was created by these bankers. Okay? That's a fact. And you'll see, as I'm going to lay out to you, that war, banking, rape and pillage of resources, and the utter destruction of people, all these things go hand in hand. And these people are so self-entitled and so sociopathic and indoctrinated into the thinking that that there is nothing that they can't have, and that no human being has the right to stand in the way of their rule, their dominion, their dynasties, their monopolies. That they're willing to do just about anything, brazenly, to accomplish their goals. So, that being said, the American financiers at the turn of the century, they created the Federal Reserve, they created the IRS to create the debt that they needed to start to pool all of the nation and the people's resources to them, right? You don't have to enslave a nation. You don't have to turn it necessarily into a socialist or communist regime in order to take control. All you have to do is control the money supply and control the debt. And as long as government is bought out and participating, you have a nation enslaved, and a nation that is bought, captured, and corrupted. So, I mean, you understand Monsanto, Bayer, where it came from, World War II, Germany? Okay, I'll get back to that later. So, the legacy, the Nazi legacy, the thinking, the brashness of Hitler. You can even argue of Mao, the way that they take care of their political opponents. These people got their ideas from the same group of assholes that I'm going to tell you about, okay? Prescott Bush, the Harriman brothers, Allen Dulles, the Walkers, the Mellons, the Fords, the Rockefellers, and of course the Rothschilds, who funded most of them, and who own most of the business in the world, even today, through BlackRock and Vanguard, all right? These are the people who funded and profited off both sides of World War I. And that led to their greedy little orchestrating and puppeteering to get us into World War II. Now, if that sounds... Many of you already know this. Many people are awake to this now, more than ever. For those of you tuning in who, maybe thought that you were going to hear about JFK, you are. Stay patient. In order to understand how JFK was assassinated in broad daylight and the powers that came to be, in order to pull this off, I have to go back in time to tell you who and how those powers came to be, okay? And you got to understand that these people made their money off war, oil, and debt, banking, okay? Who am I talking about? All the families I just named, all right? Henry Ford was selling Ford trucks and tanks to both sides. Henry Ford was very, very close with Adolf Hitler, as was Prescott Bush. They were BFFs. The Rockefellers, the family, the Rockefelders at one point, they changed their name, just like the Rothschilds. The Rockefellers, through Standard Oil, with the Rothschilds, funded Adolf Hitler's campaigns. J.P. Morgan, the Mellons, these people put the German war machine on the map, okay? They put that entire economy on the map. Did they know that Hitler was going to do what he did? That is the bigger question. And it doesn't really matter, because they were the ones that kept America out of the war, because they didn't want Hitler to stop doing what he was doing. So you could argue all day that they were just making a smart business move. Meanwhile, they found out millions of Jews were being slaughtered and used for slave labor. And guess who was profiting off that slave labor? They were. So you can argue all day that it was a smart business move, and business is business, and business is business, and all this happy horse shit that you've been indoctrinated into thinking is okay and justifiable. It's not. There is no excuse. They knew millions of people were being killed. They were the ones profiting off the slave labor. Okay? Period. So, back to, Ford, World War II. Just an interesting fact for those of you who don't follow me and, haven't heard me talk about this. Henry Ford, 4,000 miles away in his office in Dearborn, Michigan, was given the Grand Cross of the Eagle, which is the highest honor the Nazis ever bestow on a civilian. And Hitler had a Henry Ford bust in his office that he looked at with great gratitude and love in his heart for his friend Henry Ford. Henry Ford also was a pretty loud and outspoken anti-Semitic person. And I wonder if he had the same Zionists whispering in his ear that Hitler did about the final solution, which of course was not Hitler's idea. It's a Zionist campaign. Anyway, we'll leave that alone for a while, okay? Let's get back to the fact that all these companies made a shitload of money off Adolf Hitler and Germany and killing people. Why is this relevant? Okay, why should you care? What does this have to do with the JFK assassination? Everything. It has everything to do with the JFK assassination. Because World War II, just like World War I, was orchestrated. It was orchestrated and prolonged and enabled and financed at the cost of tens of millions of lives from around the world, from Europe and America. And our young men and women were sent to die for these people, not our government. Not was it patriotic of them? Absolutely. But every single war has been orchestrated and staged through lies and deception and false flags in order for these families that I'm going to talk to you about, these oil tycoons, these oligarchs, to further their control and enrich their bank accounts to ends they probably couldn't even have imagined, okay? And you're going to see, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how underneath all that, there may be something even more sinister, if I dare to use that word, going on in this blatant disregard for humanity and human life and lack of empathy and these psychotic and sociopathic tendencies that these families are indoctrinated with that makes them think that we are disposable as cattle to them and they can do whatever the fuck they want to rule and govern a population that is not as smart and does not have the resources that they have. We're going to get into it. This has been about a transfer of wealth and power from the many to the few, and that has not changed. Only the campaign and the cause has. But traditionally, war, famine, strife, crisis, emergencies, enemies, invisible ones are even better these days, in case you haven't noticed. These are the ways in which these people, this is the Davos crowd, this is the current iteration of what used to be the Council of Rome, the Bilderberg Group. People talk about the Illuminati and everyone's eyes glaze over like, can it be? Of course it can be. It is. Look around you. Politicians are that stupid by design. We're going to talk about it. False flags, okay? These governments that have been captured and owned, are in place to transfer money from their nations into the hands and control of these few people, okay? And they use trauma, they use war, they use false flags and horror. And as long as people continue to have to work day and night just to put money in food, money in the bank, food on the table, and support their kids, they know that they're not going to have much time to stop and scratch their heads and wonder, what the fuck is going on? They're just going to read whatever is written and continue on with their lives, okay? So, because if they didn't have to do that, then why would they continue to give half their paycheck to the government? They need this. The government knows they need this enemy, this event, this false flag, and they'll continue to create them, obviously. Okay. Now, at the turn of the century, a new class of international financiers became even more deeply involved in military intelligence for reasons as I just stated. War is a racket. Emergency is a racket. Anything that creates more debt and destruction serves their ends. And nothing creates more debt and destruction than war and famine and this kind of conflict, armed conflict. They learned that in World War I, okay? So after World War I, and then leading into World War II, the intelligence agencies were formed. Now, the government was used by these families to form those agencies because, well, if the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds formed their own little intelligence agencies, they would be questioned. They could not operate with the same kind of power that a national government agency could. Okay, and so they got together and they created first the OSS, then the CIA, then the FBI, and they continued to create them. They continued to create them to do the things which is basically illegal for a government to do without them. Most recent iteration, the Homeland Security. None of these agencies are created for the purpose of what we are told as the public. And the people who get to the highest echelons of these agencies, they know the truth. I doubt that people just getting into them are as aware. But so the CIA was created and formed to look out for the, quote, interests of America, which, of course, then and now are the corporate interests of the oligarchs, period. It's the same with every three-letter agency, my friends. These agencies have been created not to look out for we the people. They've been hijacked, the same as our government, and created to look out for the corporate interests of these families, okay? So, the original relationship with American military intelligence stretched back into World War I. Why is that important? Why must they have intelligence in the nation? Well, if you're going to ensure that World War II happens, you need to know what is happening in each government, okay? And you have your paid assets and puppets and politicians who are going to feed that information to you. And just like a person who is playing chess, you can then move each piece and wait and see and get the reaction that you want. Okay, and that's how World War II was started, with the sinking of the Lusitania. That's how Vietnam was started, with the fake Gulf of Tonkin, the fake attack, which was proven to be fraud, a false flag. The United States had its little ship drive around in circles and fire rockets, and they said, we were under attack. False flag. The Lusitania, the Germans warned America not to put civilians on that ship. They even sent a wire to America to go out to the public. Do not get on the ship. J.P. Morgan bought the press. He didn't let that wire come out. It was in his best interest, not only to let the Lusitania sink, but then to lend the money to America to go to war. Do you understand? Do you see how this works now? So let's fast forward now. Because Roosevelt died soon after the war was over, okay, and with him gone, the oligarchs needed another puppet to come up and be able to manipulate. So Prescott Bush was the one in charge of finding that puppet, and in true American fashion, he decided to advertise. He placed an ad in the LA Times which candidly explained what him and the Walkers and the Harrimans were looking for. And here's what the article said. And it was worded as such, and I quote, "A group of rich businessmen are seeking a young, ambitious, immoral, and most definitely malleable politician who might one day run for president." Who do you think answered the call? Richard Nixon. Tricky Dick. Tricky Dick. I'm going to show you a picture, if you're watching on YouTube, of Dick Nixon shaking the hands of Prescott Bush. Prescott Bush was openly supportive of the Nazi, financed Hitler, had his assets frozen in the Trading with the Enemy Act back when the war really ramped up. And while the government should have arrested him for treason, they didn't because of who he is and who his cronies were. But the bank that they formed to fund Hitler, him and the Harrimans, the Union Bank, I believe it was called, had their assets frozen. That sucks, huh? That's one of the biggest reasons why we didn't enter the war, not because we were trying to remain neutral. America doesn't remain neutral. The oligarchs didn't want us entering the war. They were making way too much money off slave labor and concentration camps that they helped build from Hitler and the war machine that they helped invest in. Not like what's going on in Ukraine right now. Now, Tricky Dick. Remember Richard Nixon. He's a very, very side player in this, but his associations will also help illuminate the main players. Okay, so that picture was from 1947. I just showed you. Richard Nixon, well documented, was friends with and often used Jacob Rubenstein, Jack Ruby. They were buddy-buddy. We're seen together a lot. We're going to get into one of the main places they were seen together, which was at a party the night before Kennedy was killed at an oil tycoon's house called Murchison. Now, this is well documented. This has come out in many, many books. Jacob Rubenstein came to be known as Jack Ruby. He was a well-documented and paid FBI informant and mafia thug. Now, he's the one who strolled in to the basement and knocked off Lee, okay? And then, let me not get ahead of myself, okay? Well, there's a lot to lay out here. Let's talk about, first, the fact that the Dallas PD, at that time, Officer J.D. Tibbet was murdered, okay? Now, as I went over in the last episode, and as many of you who are into this know, this was highly suspicious. Everything that happened to his body after he was killed is very, very suspicious, okay? J.D. Tibbet was also seen and well known to associate with Jack Ruby. They were friends. So I want to show you a clip, okay? I want you to understand that the Dallas PD was a character in this. And you need to understand that from the word go, these corrupt politicians, and some of these guys I'm going to show you, were at the party at Murchison's house the night before the assassination, okay? And let me show you that now real quick.
We are in the office of Napoleon J. Daniels, a real estate broker in Dallas, Texas. Mr. Daniels, have you been associated with the Dallas Police Force?
I was for 7 years.
In what capacity?
As a patrolman.
Where were you on November 24th, 1963?
Well, I was going down to inspect the assassination site around 11 o'clock, I guess, and I noticed Officer Vaughn standing on the Main Street ramp of the City Hall at the basement, and I stopped to go back to talk to him, and I asked him what his purpose was there, and he told me he was keeping anybody from entering the basement because they fixed to transfer Oswald.
How long did you remain in front of the Main Street ramp with Officer Vaughn?
About 20 minutes, I guess.
Did you remain there until you heard a shot?
I did.
From 11 o'clock until 11:20, did anyone enter the basement through the Main Street ramp?
There's one man about a couple of minutes before Oswald was shot.
Could you describe that man?
Yes, he was a white man, weighed about 175, and had on a blue suit, about 5'9".
What was the color of his hair?
It's brownish.
The basement.
It's bald in the top.
Was there anything else distinctive about the gentleman?
He had his right hand in his right coat pocket, and something seemed to be protruding from it.
A man who
What was your impression when you saw him enter the basement with his hand in his pocket?
My first impression was that he had a gun in his pocket, and then I didn't think too much about it because Officer Vaughn didn't challenge him. He just let him go on down in it.
Did Vaughn indicate any recognition or knowledge of who the person was when the man passed by him?
Well, I just assumed he did because he didn't try to stop him. I assumed he knew who he was.
Did Vaughn allow anyone else to enter the basement other than that one man?
No.
How long after that man entered the basement did you hear a shot?
About time enough, I guess, for him to walk down in there and get settled.
Chief Curry, would you comment on the presence of
Chief Curry.
Jack Ruby in the basement of City Hall while Lee Harvey Oswald was being transferred? How did he get there?
Well, of course, it's been pretty well established by this time that he came in the ramp entrance, on the Main Street entrance. And the officer who was guarding this door had stepped away to permit a vehicle to come out. It wasn't necessary that he do this, but he had stepped across the sidewalk to assist a vehicle coming out of the basement. And that's when Ruby came into the basement. And this was less than 2 minutes before Oswald was brought down.
Where was Officer Vaughn standing when this man entered past him?
He was sitting right in the center of the entrance to the basement there.
And what was his responsibility or obligation that day? Do you know?
Did not let anyone go down in there for them. I know.
Have you any idea why he allowed this man to enter past him?
No, I don't know, other than just he knew who he was or something. That's what I thought at the time. He had to know who he was.
Did Officer Vaughn look at the man who walked past him?
He looked in this direction, yes.
We're at the Lewiston Raceway in Lewiston, Maine, with Mrs. Nancy Hamilton, owner of the Hamilton Stables. Mrs. Hamilton, did you testify as a witness before the Warren Commission?
Yes, I did. On June 2nd, 1964, we have been a freelance investigator for various police departments, district attorney's offices, such as the Sacramento District Attorney's Office, Suffolk County, Massachusetts District Attorney's Office, Boston Police Department, and various private detectives.
And before that, were you employed by Jack Ruby?
Yes, I was. This was in 1961 in Dallas at his club, the Carousel, and I was bartender, waitress, and rather the manager there.
How did you get that job?
I had gone into Dallas not knowing anyone, and of course, the first place I went was the police department. And they were very kind and got me the job there.
They got you the job at Jack Ruby's club?
Yes, they did.
Did they know Ruby?
Personally, oh yes, very well. Vouched for him. Wonderful person, great man. Well known by the Dallas Police Department.
What were your duties there?
Well, general bar duties, such as setting up the liquor, getting the bar ready for the evening trade, waiting tables if he was short-handed. Otherwise, I'd be behind the bar serving the drinks.
Did you ever serve drinks to Dallas police officers?
Oh, yes. In fact, the Dallas police officers were the special boys, shall we say. We even had a private stock for them.
Private stock?
Oh, yes. They wouldn't, bar liquor wasn't for them. We had names such as Hagen Haig or Black Label, the very, very high-priced drinks on the house, of course. You'd never, and that was a gross oversight if you ever charged a Dallas police officer or any official of the city of Dallas or Tarrant County.
Well, other than the Dallas police officers, what officials did frequent the Ruby's establishment?
Oh, such as your district attorney, which would be Mr. Wade.
Did you receive any specific instructions from Jack Ruby about serving drinks for the Dallas police officers?
Yes, in fact, Jack told me point blank. He said, Nancy, if you ever He said intentionally or unintentionally charge a Dallas police officer. He said, you might as well go look for another job. He said, don't offend them, cater to them, talk with them, even if you ignore the other customers. Bend over backwards to be nice to them.
Did Ruby perform any other favors for the Dallas police officers?
Well, favors, we call them favors, I suppose so. He provided girls, gambling, and booze.
How many
Booze.
Dallas police officers would you estimate Jack Ruby knew on a personal basis?
At least half and probably 2/3.
There were almost 1,200 police officers in Dallas in 1963. Would you say Ruby knew 600 of them?
Oh, easily.
A great deal has been written about the relationship of the Dallas
Now,
Police
for
Department
those of you
with Jack
listening,
Ruby.
we're back to Chief Curry.
We have 1,200 men in our department, and we had each man to submit a report regarding his knowledge or acquaintance with Jack Ruby. Less than 50 men even knew Jack Ruby.
You see, Jack Ruby was a man who wanted to be noticed, wanted to be known. And he used to frequent the Dallas Police Department. And he used to brag, I can get this fixed for you, or I can get that fixed for you.
Did the Dallas Police Department or District Attorney's Office ever do any favors for Jack Ruby?
Several that I could probably name, such as serving drinks a little late.
I mean, Ruby was permitted to serve drinks after hours.
He did, and no one ever interfered. And, of course, it was common knowledge that he ran girls and gambling, and I've never seen him any kind of pickup on it.
Did you serve mixed drinks to police officers?
Yes.
Is it against the law in Dallas to
It
serve
was.
mixed drinks?
Oh, yes, definitely, except in a private club.
This, of course, was not a private club.
No, open club.
So that every time you served a drink to a police officer, it was a violation of the law.
Yes, and I'd say that's why I broke the law a few hundred times in doing so.
And of course, the police were witnesses.
Well, up to a point, there was witnesses. After that, I guess they probably didn't care.
And this
Johnson,
this is the piano player from Jack Ruby's, who will back up everything she just said. Why am I sharing this with you? So that you understand that the investigation from the word go was not only completely corrupted and compromised, but it was thwarted. It was all designed, and the Dallas PD was used, and their relationship with well-known mafioso and FBI informant Jack Ruby was taken advantage of. You had a situation in Dallas that was a perfect storm for Kennedy's visit. Now, what set it off? Because obviously the CIA does not act without orders. But I just told you the CIA was formed by these rich oligarchs to do and be, a true organized crime, because you can only get so far with the mafia, right? You're going to see them all working together with this. And they had been, in fact. But, so, after the Bay of Pigs, for those of you who don't know what the Bay of Pigs was or is, the Bay of Pigs was the CIA's invasion into Cuba. Okay? This invasion should not have been. Kennedy was incensed when he learned that the CIA had literally taken it upon themselves and taken warships and invaded a foreign country. Now, why did they do this? I'm going to tell you why. Because the oil tycoons had a massive investment that was going under, okay? And Allen Dulles, who was in charge of the CIA at the time, was using the CIA to do his handlers' bidding. I mean, don't get me wrong, Allen Dulles was one of the people doing the handling as well. But he got in deep shit for this because Kennedy found out about it, and Kennedy was not going to deal with this. He fired Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles is the same cat who sat and wrote the Treaty of Versailles, which put Germany into the most massive debt that the world had ever known at the time. This is a very conniving and insidious man who is sworn to these circles, not to any nation. Okay, he's a snake in the grass. So Allen Dulles got fired. Must have been a great shock to his ego, for staging an invasion on the foreign nation of Cuba without telling the president. Okay, and then continuing to try to lie about what was happening. Now, listen. Okay, I'm going to try to lay this out for you. That was when the president, JFK, famously vowed to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the four winds. All right, and it doesn't take a genius to see why the CIA wanted and was at odds with JFK. Now, Jack Crichton Austin was lifelong friends with Allen Dulles, and the Bush family were lifelong friends with Allen Dulles. All these people were Nazi sympathizers openly. They're the ones who started the financing and the supporting of Hitler. And in fact, they enjoyed the fascist ideas of Adolf Hitler and Mussolini. And they were profiting off both sides of the war and keeping it going for as long as they could. These are the same people the same legacy families that manipulated, the United States government into getting involved in World War I, into conning Congress and the Senate into allowing the Federal Reserve to be created, and then taking over our money supply. These are the people who have done this, and many of them, due to its incredible oil reserves, have set up home and shop in Texas. So, speaking of Texas, the Bush family and Jack Austin Crichton and Clint Murchison, all these guys had just purchased 15 million acres of Cuban property to expand their oil monopoly. But the United States, we had been backing the Nationals and the Communists to keep the fighting going, to keep them destabilized. And guess what? Castro and the Communists won out. And the first thing Castro did when he got into power was say, thanks for the land, thanks for the oil, take a hike. And these guys who had just put all this money and property and began to use the oil that they had bought in Cuba had been kicked out by force. Imagine these families. Imagine the reaction. Okay, now this was a big no-no. This is the reason why they did the invasion without telling Kennedy, because they were so incensed and their egos were so bruised that they had been kicked out. After spending so much money, that they tried to invade Cuba. Okay. And Kennedy called it off and then fired Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles, friends with all these oligarch families. Okay, now let me figure out where I am here. Okay, so, now these people had just purchased 15 million acres of Cuban property to expand their oil monopoly. That's almost half the island that they bought to drill for oil. And when Castro came to power and stayed there, he reduced their ownership to 20,000 acres. Okay, this is a colossal investment failure for them, and that led to Crichton CVOVT Oil Exploration Company being delisted from the New York Stock Exchange, and a humiliating loss for these families of nearly $30 billion. Okay, they were upset, to say the least. Kennedy also intended to and spoke about ending their favorite and most vital tax break that they enjoyed, the oil depletion tax break. Kennedy was going to end it. Okay, they had a very big problem with Kennedy for a lot of reasons. They were trying to steer him and they were not succeeding. Now, let me tell you a little story I just recently learned, okay, about George Bush. Now, George Herbert Walker Bush. George Herbert Walker Bush declared and maintained for decades that he couldn't remember where he was on November 22nd, 1963. This is a joke of a claim to make. Everybody remembers who was alive and, of an age where they had the capacity to create memories, where the fuck they were on November 22nd, 1963. This is a joke of a claim to make. Only somebody who's so guilty and so under scrutiny that they better to say nothing at all than to say where they were. So, but he maintained this for decades. And he, in 1976, when he was appointed director of the CIA officially, he essentially said to them, read my lips, I've never worked for the CIA before this moment, okay? Under oath. But as I just showed you with the police chief in Dallas, these people lie as well as they breathe, okay? And they have no true oath because they have no true God. Their God is gold, oil, and drugs, okay? Power and money. And people like the Skull and Bones Bush family and these people, there's a lot of evidence to show that they have sworn to a different kind of God, one that is that holds destruction and chaos and suffering in the highest regard. So that's another podcast. We'll table that for now. Back to this. Okay, now listen to this. Understand the connection between Nazi Germany and our United States government today, and how it runs like a weed from there to here. Now listen to this. He lied under oath and told the people asking questions that he never worked for the CIA. Okay? But lo and behold, a memorandum came forward, authenticated by J. Edgar Hoover, dated November 29th, 1963, saying that Mr. George Bush of the Central Intelligence Agency was briefed by Mr. Forsyth the day after the Kennedy assassination about the Kennedy assassination. Oops. Herbert never anticipated that document coming to the light of day. Okay. So, got caught lying again. Now, he was briefed about it. And in fact, he knew about it. Of course he knew about it. He was part of it. Now, we're not talking about a secretary lying under oath. We're talking about a man who became the president of the United States. We're talking about the person who became the head of the CIA. All right? He has spent time in deep cover and covert intelligence of the most heinous kind for years, and he never admitted or revealed that to the American people, and he still hasn't. Now more about Bush, okay? This is Bush Sr. He left New Haven. Now listen, this is what ties into the oil merchants. He left New Haven and formed a company called Zapata, and that was his lucky code name for the CIA. We'll get back to that. But this was called Zapata Petroleum in Midland, Texas. He sold his interest at some point and made more hundreds of millions to add. Zapata Offshore Petroleum in Houston when he was married to Barbara Bush. Okay. Now, if you recall, Zapata Offshore Petroleum had helicopter pads all over the South American seas, all over the Middle East. And what they were using those helicopter pads for has been the subject of great debate. But Mena, Arkansas and Bill Clinton, those two places and people come to mind, okay? The war on drugs, the Vietnam War, the one that Kennedy wanted to stop, the one that Kennedy vowed to stop, and the one that he was in the process of stopping. Yeah. That war, the war that George Bush Sr. was implicated in, the Iran-Contra, selling massive amounts, flooding our streets with heroin and cocaine. There are many witnesses that came forward and said that we were using the dead bodies of American soldiers to bring back those illegal narcotics. Meanwhile, George Bush was put in charge of the CIA so that he could oversee all of these operations and continue to fund more black ops programs for his CIA. Now, and make sure he could get away with it since he was the one doing the, quote, investigating. Now, back to where we were. Now listen. Zapata Offshore Petroleum in Houston, okay? A lot of this has come out about the Iran-Contras and the war on drugs and the drug trade, Vietnam War, okay? Which all of this was enabled by the death of Kennedy. Kennedy was going to stop us and pull out of Vietnam. Fletcher Prouty was a colonel in the Air Force. He testified to this. He provided weapons of war for the CIA at the time. And he was ordered, this is a fact, to provide 2 ships to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. and he provided them for George Bush. And he got them from a naval facility in Chesapeake Bay, which was near Washington, D.C. And they were sent down to Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And they had the numbers and identification scraped off them so that they could not be identified, right? Almost the same way that Israel had their attack force on the USS Liberty scraped off it. Notice the pattern? Okay, so do you know what the top secret name for the invasion of the Bay and Pigs was? Known only to the Joint Chiefs of Staff? You know what it was called? Operation Zapata. And the names of the two ships? Barbara and Houston. How fucking original. The only two ships which invaded at Cuba before Kennedy caught wind of it and called it off. Okay? Do you think that these parties were a little upset with Jackie for calling off their little war? I think so. Interesting fact. In 1998, Halliburton merged with Dresser Industries, which included Kellogg. Prescott Bush was a director of Dresser Industries, which is now part of Halliburton. His son, former President George H.W. Bush, worked at Dresser Industries in several positions from 1948 to 1951 before he founded Zapata Corporation. Do you understand the lineage of war, of manipulation, of genocide that these people have been on for their own obscene profits and lust for power? It is real, my friends. It is absolutely real. It's not, it is a conspiracy. And the fact that they own these establishments and do business with them, they get a chance to try to censor the information from you. But let's look at, before we go further, I want to read to you, before we get into some of the conclusions, who's who on the Warren Commission. Because when you see who was put in charge of the Warren Commission, and you match up some of these names, but okay, because these names are going to come back around, all right? I want to read this to you so that you understand who Lyndon Johnson, who absolutely had knowledge all this was going on, that's a fact, and I'll show you why I know that's a fact and why you can verify it's a fact. I want to read to you this about the Warren Commission. Okay. The formal name of this group was the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy, but it was popularly called the Warren Commission. It was comprised of 2 Republicans, 1 senator, and 1 member of the House of Representatives, and 2 Southern Democrats during the era of heated civil rights differences in which Southern Democrats rebelled by often supporting Republican candidates. There was not a single supporter of Kennedy on the commission. Now listen. In addition, Lyndon Johnson appointed John McCloy, the former Assistant Secretary of War, notorious for his refusal to endorse bombing raids on the rail approaches to Auschwitz's concentration camp, raids that would have saved countless Nazi Holocaust victims' lives, and notorious for supporting Hitler, at least until 1939, when he shared a box with Hitler at the 1936 Olympics. After the war, McCloy refused to endorse compensation for innocent Japanese Americans who had been held in American concentration camps. In short, McCloy was kind to criminals, but took a strong stance against the innocent. Johnson also appointed Allen Dulles, who I was just telling you about. He put him in charge of the Warren Commission, the former director of the CIA who had been fired by Jackie Kennedy for lying to him about the Bay of Pigs, and numerous other deceits. Formerly top-secret documents now available, including transcripts of executive meetings, disclose beyond a doubt that Allen Dulles ran the Warren Commission. He was in fact the only member actively involved in the group who was not otherwise employed. He was familiar with assassinations. Under his leadership, the CIA was involved in numerous efforts to remove foreign leaders by covert means, CIA-led coups. Okay? So those are some of the people involved. Now, the chairman of the group, Earl Warren, was an active politician and prosecutor. He had been appointed, not elected, district attorney of Alameda, California, when his predecessor resigned. He had an established reputation for conducting his office in a high-handed manner and arguably denying rights to defendants. He was elected governor of the state as a take-no-prisoners prosecutor, and he played a pivotal role in implementing the plan to establish concentration camps in the U.S. in which innocent Japanese Americans were imprisoned, while members of his voting blocs seized their property. You see what kind of a man Warren was, okay? Yeah. Famous quote was by Albert Einstein. Only two things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity, and I'm not sure about the former. Anyway, that's the Warren Commission. Now, I want to tell you about two things that you need to know. Marita Lorenz was a famous CIA operative. Famous because she had a very, very intimate relationship with Castro. They were hoping that she would be able to kill him, and they trained her for it. She ended up becoming pregnant with Castro's child. I'm sure she's not the only one, but she stayed on after they were forced to pool the resources out of Cuba, and she worked under her CIA handler Frank Sturgis, another important name. Frank Sturgis was on a lot of talk shows. He was later arrested for the Watergate. Him, E. Howard Hunt, all these people. So, and Marita Lorenz testified under oath about Operation Mongoose, which was, they were hired and trained to kill Castro. There was a team of assassins. The CIA was training assassins. And even though she failed to kill him, she stayed on, and it was her testimony which came out of the Spotlight magazine trial in a skillful and brilliant cross-examination by Mark Lane. Okay, she didn't testify in the Spotlight trial. The Spotlight trial, now let me explain this to you, was a libel and defamation trial brought against Spotlight magazine, which was a right-wing conservative magazine that ran a story which was written by a former CIA guy who had become a whistleblower. And it detailed Mark Lane's book. And it was a very powerful article. And it implemented E. Howard Hunt, who of course was deeply involved in the assassination with JFK, and the CIA. And it basically said that they're responsible for the death of President Kennedy. Well, E. Howard Hunt, who had just got out of jail for Watergate, sued the newspaper for defamation and libel. And it was a debacle, and he won the first case. He won like $600,000, and he had this whole bullshit story about how he was never in Dallas. He was home with his family for 72 hours during the assassination. He was with his kids the whole time, and at the same time, he told them that he told the jury that his kids came to him and said, "Daddy, we read this newspaper article. Why did you kill the president?" And he had these crocodile tears. And anyway, he convinced all of them. They all bought his bullshit. Mark Lane had the verdict thrown out because they had violated so much procedural stuff in the trial that it was declared a plain error. And they were forced to redo the case. And this time Mark Lane represented Spotlight, the magazine. And Mark Lane told the magazine, which was on the verge of bankruptcy, that he was not going to attempt to prove that they had not libeled and slandered E. Howard Hunt. That he was going to prove that E. Howard Hunt and the CIA were active participants and complicit and part of the orchestration and conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy. And that's exactly what he did. The trial was started, and brilliantly, because Marita Lorenz, obviously, he asked her to testify. She said, "They killed the president. That they killed the president. I'm not going to put myself at further risk." But he got her to agree to meet him privately, and very, very discreetly at an undisclosed place, and he took her deposition. Now, he asked all the questions he needed to ask in the deposition, and all the facts came out about what she saw and what happened leading up to that fateful day in Dallas. Okay, she testified under oath about Operation Mongoose, about E. Howard Hunt. She said, we met in Miami, November 21st. I was there with Frank Sturgis. E. Howard Hunt showed up. We knew him as Eduardo, and he handed out money. And we took a caravan, two caravans from Miami to Dallas the next day. He asked her if she knew what it was for, and they told her that she was to be a decoy and she did not need to know, that it was a very big job, but it was safe and that she should come along. So she did. She drove to Dallas. She described who was in the cars. Assassins, CIA assassins, trained, ex-Cuban anti-Castro nationals who had been trained to kill. They were hired assassins. They were some of the best in the world. Okay? So she testified, and it was confirmed, and it's been confirmed many times since, that they drove from Miami to Dallas, Texas. They had stashes of weapons. And Sturgis has gone on record many times and admit that he was offered money directly, but he was there the whole time. This was all bullshit. 2 Cuban gangsters, the brothers, Orlando Bosch, Pedro Lance Diaz. Okay, they met, they drove to Dallas, they got paid. They say the money came from Murchison, from the oil tycoon, all right? And there was a huge party the night before. So they met and they had to drive. Obviously, it took more than a day. But that night, the night before the assassination, Clint Murchison, whose house, I guess, was like the size of a football field, had a very, very big party. And basically, it was all these bastards getting together to celebrate the demise of President Kennedy, and the fact that they were going to put Lyndon Johnson in charge, he would be in charge by default once Kennedy was dead. And this bane in their existence, this president who had morals and ethics, was going to be out of the way. Now, Marita Lorenz testified that she saw E. Howard Hunt in Dallas the night before, and that he had driven there from Miami with them. This went again. And this came out in the Spotlight trial, because even though Marita Lorenz wouldn't testify, Mark Lane brilliantly asked one of the court clerks to read her part, as an actress would read her part. And he had her take the stand and read the part of Marita Lorenz. So he was able to bring all the testimony from Marita Lorenz into the courtroom by using a clerk to read her replies and responses from their deposition. Brilliant. Absolutely destroyed E. Howard Hunt's case, and the jury awarded, the jury came back and said that they awarded Spotlight, money, and they had to come back and say not guilty. Not guilty. That means that what they wrote is true. If it's not libel and defamation and false information, then it's true. And that's what the jury said, and they went on record saying that. They said, now we know that the CIA and E. Howard Hunt were part of the people responsible for killing our president. But you didn't hear about it on the news, and you won't ever hear about it on the news, because the news is complicit. The news has been complicit, as I started to tell you in the first part of this. As we saw during the 2020 fake health scare, as we saw during 9/11, the news, these are assets owned by them, and they have taken full control of them. Now, this party that they had, their little shindig at Clint Murchison's, is important, because who showed up at this party is very, very revealing, all right? And due to the testimony in the book written by LBJ's now infamous mistress, Madeline Duncan Brown, the mother of his illegitimate son, she told us who was there. And we found out from a lot of people who worked for Clint, who had a lot of help at that time, who was there. Among them, who showed up at the party at Clint Murchison's house, the man who funded these teams of assassins through E. Howard Hunt and CIA. Who was there? Okay, who was celebrating this? Well, J. Edgar Hoover was there. Okay, Brown brothers were there. Cliff Carter, John Connolly, Senator Joseph Yarborough was there. All these people stood to lose millions from the contracts that they were going that both in Cuba and Vietnam that JFK was pulling them out of. Okay. Also present was Joseph Sevilla. He was the head of the mafia in Dallas. Earl Cable, John McCloy. Okay, John McCloy, that's the Chase Manhattan bank chief, the one who ended up in charge of the Warren Commission, the one who shared a box with Hitler. He was there. Richard Nixon was there. Harold Lafayette Hunt. Also present was this famous world-class marksman and serial killer Mark Wallace. Okay, Carlos Marcello. This was a who's who of fat cat, just talk about dudes smoking cigars. This was like a Bohemian Grove meeting, okay? It was just every bastard and their brother was there, all to celebrate Kennedy's demise and their plans for tomorrow, and also, make sure that everyone who needed to get paid was paid and all that jazz. So now listen. Interesting fact that I learned just yesterday. John, the governor, who's the dude who was shot, the governor of Texas. What's his name? God, all these guys have similar names. So let's see here. John Connolly, okay, Governor John Connolly, who was sitting next to the president's. In front of his seat, okay? He was supposed to be in the motorcade next to LBJ because they were buds, longtime friends. And LBJ was fucking furious that John had switched the seats, and he put Yarborough with LBJ and put Connolly with him. And that's because Kennedy was not very popular in Texas at the time. And the governor, who was as corrupt as they come, was. And so he switched it. He had the authority to switch it. LBJ was fucking furious. He was pissed. He got on the phone, and his mistress... Well, there's a big... a lot of people reported the yelling match that happened when LBJ found out, because LBJ knew what was going to fucking happen. He knew what the firing squad that had been set up, and he didn't want his friend to die, so he was livid, right? And Yarborough knew too. I guess Yarborough had more clout and power than Governor Connolly, right? That's what happened, because they got this. Either that somebody made the call and switched the seat. I don't know if it was Jack or not, if it was JFK, but LBJ was furious because he knew what was coming. And in fact, when Connolly was shot, the Secret Serviceman testified that he screamed, "They'll kill us all." Not, "He'll kill us all." He in a moment of panic when he was shot, he got up and screamed, and the Secret Service heard him. He said, "They'll kill us all." And that's because he knew what was coming. He was probably sweating fucking bullets. Oh my God. Talk about being put in he put himself there, so that's what he gets. Anyway, where was I? Sorry, so much shit. So yeah, I heard that story yesterday about John Connolly and LBJ and how they were pals. They made a lot of people disappear. About how LBJ's mistress was actually very well-to-do, came from a well-to-do family, was in news broadcasting or whatever, was very popular, knew everyone in Texas. That's how she met him. Anyway, where was I? Okay, so in that trial, It all came out. It all came out. You didn't hear about it, but ironically enough, a lot of the people who were involved, not ironic at all, but the people who were involved in the Kennedy assassination, like Richard Nixon, the people who were in on it, also went down in Watergate. And Frank Sturgis, E. Howard Hunt, all these people, they became a liability, but they were set up to fall, because Richard Nixon became a problem. And of course, Brown Brothers and all these oligarchs, they don't care, just the Yarborough. Anyway, all these people were reported to be at this party. Okay, I want to show you one last thing. Now, it's reported that Clint Murchison agreed that every gunman would be paid $50,000 just to be there. So a lot of money were going around, and the oil men, used their cash so that it wouldn't be traced back to them. And they did it through their mafia connections. Now, just so you understand how complicit, I want to show you something real quick. This is LBJ's mistress when she finally spoke about what happened that night. Or she spoke about a conversation that she had with him, because he left the party, left her, and then went someplace else. I forgot where, but this is a conversation she had. Madeline? Oh, here it is. Madeline Brown. Okay. So Madeline Brown wrote a biography, a tell-all, which you can't buy anymore. I mean, you could find it. It's like $350. It's out of print, but it, Lyndon Johnson and his attack dogs came out of the woodwork to belittle her when she tried to get I think it was her son who sued the LBJ estate after he died for $10 million. And then they attacked her and they called her a whore, but they never knocked her off because she had his son. I think that's the only thing that kept her alive, because she was a liability. She knew everything, but she had been with him she had been his mistress for decades. And so, he had a true relationship with her, and he loved her, even though he was fucked up. But so one of the interviews that they took from her, where she's speaking candidly about a conversation she had with him, is here. Now, everything she saw at that party is backed up in her book, and it's backed up by other people who were at the party who wrote the same thing, that Richard Nixon was there, that Jack Ruby was there. They were all at this party. A lot of people were there. I think Oswald Stubble was there. So I want to show you this, and then I got to get into one more thing, okay? I want to get into the Zapruder film, and finally J.D. Tippit and where he comes into this. So much, okay.
Let's go back to the night before. When Johnson came out of the meeting, what did he say to you?
He was so angry. He had a violent temper when he was upset.
Well, let's use the exact words that he said to you. What did he say to you?
He grabbed me by the arm, and he had this deep voice, and he said, "After tomorrow, those SOBs will never embarrass me again. That's no threat. That's a promise." And it startled me, really, because he was so ruddy-faced. And I thought, oh, well, he really, something went on that shouldn't have gone on, But he called me from the Texas hotel the next morning as I was going downtown,
right,
and hear this screaming voice of his. He was so irate, and he didn't give me time to talk to him. He just he was still angry. And when I talked to Jess Kellum right after that, I said, "Wow, he's on a real violent binge, And then I passed it off. I said, "Well, after tonight, if the Driscoll, he'll be all right."
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't see him again
What
until.
were the words he said to you over the phone?
That they would never embarrass him again. But SOB, the Irish Mafia, I think he referred to him as the Irish Mafia.
Refer to Kennedy
There
as
you
the
are.
Irish Mafia. So what he was upset about was when he found out that Yarborough, his seat had been switched before the motorcade. Yarborough with his buddy Connolly, who was, as we know, shot. So I stopped sharing now, but I'm going to share one more thing because I want to get into. I cannot pass the opportunity up. I want you to understand that the Zapruder film. What's going on with my shit here? Hold on. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Two more things I got to show you. Now, Robert Morningstar, a guest on my podcast, incredible mind. Photography analysis, civilian analysis, intelligence analysis, psychology degree, brilliant mind. He had made a lot of breakthroughs on this case about J.D. Tippit and how he was used, even though he was part of these people. He was chosen because of his resemblance to JFK, and they knew they were going to need a body, and he was double-crossed. And you'll hear him say in this that he was killed by Oswald's double. Oswald had a double running around, and we know that now because it came out in a FOIA request that the FBI interviewed him for 17 hours in Mexico City when they finally caught up with him. They destroyed the transcripts of those interviews, but we know that there was an Oswald double running around. And that they had employed. I forgot the main differences, but you'll hear him reference that. Now, you're going to hear two things. The first, you're going to hear how he saw the Zapruder film being manipulated. And then in the second one, you're going to hear about J.D. Tippit, okay? So I'm going to share my screen again. And this is the last two things I want to talk to you guys about. I want to share with you, okay? This is from my podcast with Robert Morningstar. If you have not seen it, the whole thing is as fascinating as these two clips now. Hold on one second. Share my screen one more time.
And I got the best recording of the best reproduction of the Zapruder film that has ever been done. So this was a bumped up version of the Zapruder film.
Oh, wow.
So I get a copy of this. So I start playing it. And the first time I blinked. The second time I played in slow motion. I saw these splice marks going by. At least six splice marks, but unique splice marks, not just cut and join,
Right.
but cut, something interposed in proportion to the frame.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this is really strange. And what is it doing? Oh, I see it. It's an optical illusion. They cut out 10 feet of film in the Zapruder film, and then they spliced it to join. So what was missing, I found over years and years of investigation, was that President Kennedy had been hit by 5 shots.
Five.
The reason
Wow.
I'm doing this is to give you an idea of how this tampering is done. Imagine that I put a piece of Scotch tape across my fingertips like that, stretch it out.
Mm-hmm.
And now instead of Scotch tape, imagine that I've got the Zapruder film stretched out across, the real Zapruder film,
Right.
in which there were 5 shots. Shot number 1, shot number 2, 3, 4, 5. There were more, but
Right.
see, the 5 captured by the Zapruder.
There were more.
So now I have the problem that the Warren Commission had. You have a film that shows the president getting hit 5 times. How do you fix that?
Right.
Okay, I'll tell you. You cut the time between the first shot and the second shot here. Cut that out, and you join those 2 shots to make it appear as one. This is what happened when the car passed the sign. The car went to the sign, it stopped. The president got hit in the back. He stood up and he said, "Oh my God, I've been shot." And the Secret Serviceman heard him.
That's
And he
right.
fell
He did.
back into the seat, and then the car started to crawl out. And the next thing you see is when Kennedy goes like this. But
That's
in the frame before, in the first frame when the car emerges from behind the sign, the president is holding his abdomen like this, which is exactly what would happen to you if you got shot in the back in a downward trajectory and the bullet went right through you into your stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I've been shot.
That's what he
In
said.
the
over
next
television.
frame, you see his arms go to this,
That's
which
when
is
he
when
got
the
shot.
throat,
Right.
the throat shot. So you took 2 shots by cutting out that strip of film and joining it. You cut out 2 shots and made them 1.
Right.
The car goes on. We're going to skip this one for a moment. This is Z295. In Z295, there's a visible vapor trail
That's
in the
right.
Zapruder film that I discovered because I hypothesized that if, and as I knew, the atmosphere was really wet. It had rained all night. It was 80
humid.
degrees, so all the moisture was rising. I said, it's possible there could have been these trails left, visible trails. So when I started looking through this, I found it. Z295. That was another
18
huge
frames
claim
per
to
second.
fame because Z295 is just 1 second away from Z313. Z295, 13 and 5, 18 frames. The FBI said
Right.
18 frames per second. So 1 second, nobody could reload in 1 second.
No.
Right? Especially Oswald, that thing took at least 2.5 seconds just to chamber,
Right.
cock and recock it, right? So now we get to the grassy knoll. The car stopped at the grassy knoll,
That's
Car
right.
stopped.
right? And they had to cut
Stopped.
out that stop completely
Cut the stop out.
because the legend is the car never stopped, right?
Right.
So the car stopped. And at that point, 3 shots hit the president
Wow.
simultaneously within 1 second of each other. And 1 shot came in from the right like this. And the vapor trail, not the vapor trail, the copper trail is visible in Z313. The first frame where the head explodes, you can see a trail of copper, alternating copper space. The bullet was tumbling or rotating.
hmm
So that one hits here, opens up his head. The next one enters the front and comes out the back.
Right.
And so that had to be hidden. So what they did, and as I said, there were 3 shots because this thing continues for several frames. You cut out this space and this space and this here, and you take in 3 shots and make it look like 1. And
Right.
because the effects on the body were the effects of 3 shots,
3 shots.
it
But-
makes no sense to anybody who studies physics.
right.
It's
Or
not
ballistics,
possible.
you
Right.
know.
It's not
Yeah.
possible.
Okay, that's one. Here's the other. Okay, so you understand why they did what they did with Tibbet, and this was some fantastic work that took him decades. And I condensed it down for you guys to 8 minutes. This is the finale of what I want to show you.
Lady Tippett.
He's
This
showing
is the
pictures.
police officer who was shot purportedly by Oswald.
Yeah.
Police officer was definitely assassinated,
Yeah.
but Oswald was already in the theater watching the movie.
That's right.
So the
That's
Oswald
speculation.
double killed Officer Tippett. But when he
Who
killed
Tippett
Officer
has not-
Tippett,
has never
he
been proven
got the drop
clear.
on him. Tippett got out of the car to talk to him. As he was
did shoot
crossing,
him 3
he
times.
whipped out the gun. He plugged him 3 times
Right.
in the abdomen. And then
Then
Tippett
afterwards.
fell. He walked over to him. He put the gun to his head and he fired
That's
1
true.
shot into his head.
Right.
And Tippett's body was swept up. Ambulance was there instantly.
That's right.
Took him away. Went to
Methodist.
First,
to,
they went to
Methodist Hospital.
right.
Yeah, and then they had the judge declare him most dead on arrival. Send him to Parkland for an
Right.
autopsy.
Transfer him. Why?
That's
what,
right.
For a dead body.
So all of this is happening within half an hour. While
Yeah.
Johnson is stalling on the airport tarmac. We can't leave until
That's
I'm
right. And there's
inaugurated,
mayhem in the city.
Right.
Total
so-
mayhem. Yeah.
They send him down. In the meantime, there's a big wrestling match over the body between the Secret Service and Errol Rose, the car. You can't take that body out of Texas.
Right.
That guy's murdered, shot in Texas, and it's a Texas autopsy that's got to be done. And the Secret Service steals the body and races off to Love Field. Then the upshot is this. I grew up with John F. Kennedy as my hero. I saw him in 1958, and this guy's really strange, man. He looks like Flash Gordon, and he
Right.
talks like somebody from England. But what he says makes a lot of sense. So I knew John F. Kennedy, his picture, everything, And then I looked at this book, Best Evidence, which
Great book.
purportedly had the autopsy pictures.
Yeah.
So I opened the book and I went, instantly said, well, that doesn't look like John F. Kennedy in 1963. He's too skinny,
Mhm.
It looks like John F. Kennedy in 1948 or 1950, but
I
not
saw
1963.
pictures.
So I closed the book, put it back in the shelf. A couple of years later, I came across that book again and read it. And that gave me the key to solving this mystery. Lifton, David Lifton, author of Best Evidence, he wasn't convinced either. You know?
No,
So
I know.
he got the autopsy report, the Warren Commission autopsy report.
That's
And
right.
he took the autopsy report to a doctor, a surgeon at University of California, Berkeley. And he said, "Doctor, I'd like you to tell me what this man died of." And he said, "I have his autopsy." He didn't tell him who. And he says, "Okay." He reads it. The parasagittal laceration of the right hemisphere,
Mhm.
cerebral peduncles destroyed. And he says, "This man sounds like to me like he was killed with an axe." And Lifton says, "What?" So he sounds like he was killed like with an axe because there's a big slice in the right side of his brain.
Right.
So Lifton goes, "How can that be?" So you read the autopsy report, and it describes a whole brain, 2 hemispheres, including the
Intact,
cerebral
yeah.
peduncles and hypothalamus.
In one piece.
In one piece. But we know from the film that it was vaporized, and there was at the most
And yet,
60% of a brain there. all
And
the
we know
doctors
from the
said-
doctors who you know, kind of in a futile manner tried to see if there was any kind of life
Right,
left, and
right.
they all testified that
They could see right through the
that's
hole.
right.
From
That's
here
right.
to here. One doctor, you know, they had to be careful. They were walking on fire.
Yes.
You know, testifying. One doctor, Dr. Carico, saw the
this is
wounds,
interesting.
and they said to him, "Well, doctor, what did it look like? A wound of entry or a wound of exit?" And Dr. Carico said, "It looked like both." And I
Yeah.
said to myself, "What? Is he saying the bullet made a U-turn?"
Yeah.
Right? Well, no. He was telling the truth. It was crisscross. He got caught in a crossfire, and these excellent marksmen put bullets through one head.
Yep.
One was an explosive bullet. Brain matter went up into the air, created a white cloud for a moment. This is testified by the CIA analyst at the NPIC, National Photographic Interpretation
Mhm.
Center, who saw the uncut film.
Wow.
And then he saw the cut film, and he said, "This is not what I saw on Friday night." Because it went boom, the plane went up, and then it rained down. So they had to cut all of that out.
Yeah.
And that's what I discovered.
Here comes
But
the
then
body swap.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
The Tippett body swap. Officer Tippett bore such a close resemblance to President Kennedy that his friends on the police department used to rib him and call him Jack and JFK.
That's right.
And that was not a nice thing in Dallas in 1960.
No, they hated him.
They hated Kennedy. Turns out that Tippett was also the best friend of Jack Ruby.
Jack Ruby. Yeah.
Jack
Crooked.
Ruby said, now get this, you got to put this all together to really wrap your head around the deception and the code words. Ruby said he shot Oswald because Oswald had killed a good man, like he killed President Kennedy.
Richard Nixon's best buddy, calling JFK
right.
as
That's right. That's right.
break.
You learned about that. That's very good.
Yeah.
So he says, "I shot Oswald because he killed President Kennedy, a good man like that." But when you realize that Tippett was called Jack, JFK, and President Kennedy by this circle of friends,
Oh yeah.
he's talking about, "I killed Oswald because he killed my best buddy, Officer Tippett, whom I used to call President Kennedy."
He's showing a picture
Right.
right now.
But the pictures that are in the morgue,
Tippett
they are not President Kennedy.
Kennedy.
They are Officer Tippett, and his brain was used for the autopsy. It was a full brain. The bullet went in here and it hit here, didn't come out. So when they did the removal of the bullet, they had to do a parasagittal laceration of the brain and slice it open, reach in, take out the bullet, and then take that brain and give it to the Warren Commission autopsist, put it in the body perhaps of President Kennedy or in the Tippett body. Because when Humes, one of the doctors, the pathologist, Dr. Humes, went to the body that was presented to him, he went like this to the brain, and he said, "Oh, it just popped right
Yeah.
out."
Literally fell
You
out.
know, and the brain cannot pop right out because
Last
the brain
episode,
is attached by the dura mater
that it
and the
was
pia mater, and it's attached to the brain stem
Unless it was,
and the spinal column.
haphazardly stuffed in. Then it
Yeah,
could.
exactly. But I have to hand it to the FBI. Those guys,
Siebert.
some of those guys
Siebert and
did their
two
jobs.
Yeah,
Siebert and O'Neill.
that's right.
They
Siebert
saw
and
the
O'Neill.
body in Dallas, and they saw it in the emergency or trauma room. Then they saw the body they brought out in Washington, and they said, "Oh, it was obvious that surgery had been performed specifically to the top of the skull." Put that down in the notes.
Right.
And then the information that I have about Tippit, about his wounds, Vincent Drain, an FBI agent named Vincent Drain, and another one named Arthur Carter did that investigation. And I got my hands on the autopsy in 1993.
So
And that's how I
I'm gonna
unraveled
stop
this
sharing.
whole mystery.
The picture he showed is a picture that he took of both Kennedy and Tibbet when he learned about Tibbet's nickname. And because everybody was always suspicious that Tibbet was killed, apparently by Oswald, who had ironically been seen at the club, at Jack Ruby's club with Tibbet before. And it was either Oswald or the double. In all likelihood, it was the double that they had working for them, because Oswald had only recently got to Dallas and got the job set up for him at the bookstore by the CIA. Anyway, the picture he took, both of Jack Kennedy, Jack being the nickname for John, and of Tibbet, and he literally, old school, used a precision X-Acto knife and put them together and glued them together, and was aghast at how well they fit together. And then you saw why he had the nickname and why he was chosen to be the double. That Robert Morningstar, all his investigation kind of culminated with that incredible discovery, which of course is still not, mainstream in any way, but people who are, knee deep in this and who have studied this for years do lend a lot of credence to his theory. And certainly we know Tibbet was highly involved in part of what happened and was likely sacrificed, some of the parts we'll just never know for sure, but you got to listen to my podcast with Robert Morningstar, because it is incredible. And he actually saw a very unedited version of the Zapruder film, and he talks about how basically that put him into a kind of a state of paralysis for 2 years. He didn't show anyone, he didn't tell anyone, he didn't share it with anyone. He was so scared that he had seen this, clearly unedited version of the Zapruder film that he kind of didn't leave the house. It probably saved his life, because if he had probably shared it, they would have gone after him. But, ladies and gentlemen, that is what I got for you. There's so much more to this, okay? So much more. It's more than I can deliver to you in this 2-part series, but the nuances of this conspiracy are seemingly infinite. And as I tried to point out, it's important to know, because there's a legacy here that is still very much part of our government and still alive and well, and nobody has been held accountable. And who knows, by the time the truth comes out, there won't be anyone around to hold accountable, but there certainly is a lot to learn. And that's why I am fascinated with this and interested in sharing this information for people who maybe don't have as much time to research it as I do. But pick up Mark Lane's books, listen to his interviews, pick up David Lifton's books. The truth is not hiding, okay? There may be a conspiracy, but the truth's out there. And they made a mess of this one, and they're still covering it up. Anyway, my friends, if you enjoyed this episode, please let me know in the comments. Please let me know a subject that you would like me to dive deep into and bring you all the truth that I can find about it out. I was considering doing a special on Yasser Arafat because of everything that he was trying to do for the country of Libya. And fascinating individual, was doing big things. Anyway, I'm thinking about maybe doing an episode on him because he was taken out by these same people. But there's a lot of people, you know, there's also Martin Luther King. There's Bobby Kennedy. There's a lot of people who fall in this category, but I want to do something that I know is relevant and people should know. So if you like this episode, please let me know in the comments. Please like it and share it, because subjects like this are, you know, freedom of speech, not reach in this country. They don't get around easy, so we have to share them. And I appreciate you all. Much love to all of you. I'm going to keep doing episodes of this manner as long as you guys let me know you want them to keep coming. And lots of new stuff coming. Hooking this podcast studio up you see behind you, so that we are going to, if all goes according to plan, shoot my first in-person interview for my podcast this weekend. And I'm going to record all that. Now, I'll keep you posted on that. But thank you guys so much for everyone who stayed with me. God bless you and your patience. I hope I did not disappoint. And I'll see you again soon. Thanks again. Question the answers, my friends. And if you have not subscribed, by God, hit the subscribe button and hit the alert and all notifications, whatever, so that you are told when I publish a video, which is every day, you know, and every Friday, and soon it'll be more than that. Okay, that's all. God bless. Thank you.